Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's really good to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me as well.
All right. So guys, sorry for the technical difficulties, but we'll get straight into it. So before we start, you can just do a quick introduction and then we'll go straight into the chat.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me, and I welcome all your guests that are on the line from all around the world. So my name is Tunji Akintokun. I guess I can start with where I'm based. I'm based in London. I'm born and bred in London, but obviously you can tell from my name that from Nigerian heritage, and I try to get back to Lagos as often as I can. I guess in terms of career, and we'll talk about it more, my current role is that I work as a senior director leading the marketing solutions business for LinkedIn for the UK and Ireland. And it's the second largest part of our business in the bit I lead globally after our NAMER team, or our North American team. So it's quite an important market for us. And for those of you not familiar with LinkedIn, we essentially have, I guess, three main parts of our business. The one that many of you on the call will be used to, which is our talent side of our business, which is where people look to find opportunities, jobs, and which is also where employees or employers rather look to find candidates for roles that they have. Most people are familiar with that part, and I'm sure many of your listeners are also LinkedIn premium users, and they get the full benefits of the platform. The second part of our business, which is the part that I lead, is our marketing solutions business, which looks and helps companies grow either through their brand activity, mainly in the business-to-business space, but also a lot of their demand generation. So those of you on the call that are familiar with marketing, we do both high or top funnel and also lower funnel. So a lot of brand activity and awareness where organizations can convey their messages on the LinkedIn platform, and also a lot of demand generation or lower funnel activity where they're seeking customers for their solutions. And that business, as you can imagine, we have over 1 billion members online now. There's a lot of insights and a lot of audiences that clients can access through our platform. And then the third part of our business is around our sales solutions, which includes all of our learning platforms as well. We have a huge learning platform, which I'm sure many of your users also use. And we also have things such as Sales Navigator, which is another very popular sales product that a lot of sales teams use. So that's kind of me in a nutshell in terms of what I do at the moment. I'm sure you can read my LinkedIn profile if you want to know more. I do a variety of things, from running a charitable trust right the way through to being a very avid art collector, to name a few.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. I think we'll go straight into it. So what piqued my interest, like the first time I heard you speak, was like talking through the 4 different careers that you've navigated through. So I thought, you'd be the perfect person to have this conversation with. And when you were answering questions at that session, you said you already had an idea of like the 5th career that you would probably transition to. Yeah. So I'm curious, like at different points, how did you sort of make that decision to say, I'm going to go from like being an athlete to being like a technologist, and then to now being a director?
Yes, it's a good question, Ibukun. And I think one thing I shared when I did that presentation, which was a Black Tech Fest, is that I think you have to be very intent-based about your career. And what you'd like to do, but the most important thing of any career journey, and I look at it as a journey, is that you need to plan for it. And I think when I started out as an athlete, I knew that my runway as an athlete would be limited in terms of age, ability. As I got older, that wasn't going to be the case, and I always had an idea that I would do my athletics for a point in time, and then I would pivot to a career in technology, which is what I'd chosen. But that decision to go into technology was made a long time before I was competing, and I'd already knew that that was what I was passionate about. I explored lots of different careers, and I think I could have probably, my father was a barrister, I could have followed that route. We've got members of our families who are accountants, doctors, lawyers, etc. But I chose technology because I saw it as something that was new, that was gaining pace quite quickly, and something that I was very interested in. So I really focused around how do I build a career out and what did I want to do. So that curiosity part is really important, to say, well, technology is a very broad area. What do I want to do? Do I want to be an engineer? Do I want to be a programmer? Do I want to do leadership? Do I want to do marketing within it? Or do I even want to do law? So I took time to explore these roles. And from that, when I then made the decision that I wanted to do technology, I did them in parallel, saying, I'll do athletics so far, and then I'll pivot. And that pivot for me, as I've often said to people, is that you've got to be agile, is that I got injured, which meant my career came to an end quite quickly. And I then was able to pivot without too much to say, right, I need to now focus on my career in technology. I made the choice to become a microelectronics engineer because, again, I was very interested in hardware, how things worked. And I pursued that career, moving into it. And I think the way I look at careers is if you think of your career as being I guess, around the world trip, you're going to plan around the world trip and you'll have a North Star. The North Star is you want to get around the world and see all these countries. But you know there are several ways that you can achieve that task. You can go by road, you can by sea, you can walk, you can take a train, etc. So what you should be prepared to do is to say, I'm going to start out on this journey. I know what my North Star is to go around the world, but be open and agile to be able to say, well, I may take a train, I might take a car, I may hitchhike some of the route, and sometimes maybe you run out of money and you can't afford to take a train, so you have to hitchhike. Other times you may decide that you need to get there quicker or slower than what you needed to do. But the whole idea is that you will pivot and take different routes. But the one thing you don't lose sight of, which is what you should do with your career, is to lose sight of what that North Star is. The North Star is to still get around the world. Your career is one that will change and will wind around, but you don't lose sight of what your plan is. And it could be a long-term plan to get to, and then you work towards that, knowing that even if you deviate, you learn as you're deviating and you grow as a person. So I've always treated my career in that way, to say that, well, nothing's forever, and that you'll never be able to, I tell my children that they're going to have at least 4 or 5 careers in their lifetime. And really what you need to focus on are skills. Yes, your academics are important to some extent, but as we move forward in the world we're living in now, in the world of work and careers, it's not just about the degree you get. And if you talk to most employers now, apprenticeships are just as equally important, or apprenticeship degrees, but it's getting those learning skills. I did a degree in microelectronics. I can tell you now, Ibukum, by the time I finished that degree, all the coding languages I used were useless. And I can tell you how, I won't age myself, but I did C++ when I was learning. By the time I came out, it had changed. And I think I did Pascal as well. So these are languages that were superseded very quickly. So now it's about being relevant. If you think about today, whether you're coding and all the different languages out there, you've got to be up to date, and universities and academic institutions don't necessarily give you the skills that you need to be able to be fit for the workplace. So having that agile mindset around the fact that your career will change. And I often use the saying that, your job will change even if you're not changing jobs, because that is more relevant than ever now. And I think that's what people need to be able to do.
Yeah. All right. Yes. I have so many questions from that. But I think the first one is, how do you sort of identify that North Star, right? Especially like when you're going from such different areas, or like areas of expertise, right? So it's not like I'm going from being a DevOps engineer to being a backend engineer. You've sort of gone through very different industries. But how do you know that this is my North Star, and despite like the career that I'm in now, I'm actually working towards that North Star, or I haven't lost my focus?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you have to do is you have to be curious, and know that, you should always be aware of the market you're in. If you're staying within your industry, you should be looking at the trends. And if you're thinking, artificial intelligence seems to be something that seems to be taking off, then you should be curious enough to do your research and start to learn about, what does that mean for my industry? Is it going to disrupt my industry? Will my role change? Will I have to do something slightly different? And I think that's the first step. I always say, research and curiosity. And then I always follow that up then in finding people that are doing those roles and finding some time with them, whether that's, if it's in the workplace, every time I've pivoted roles, I've shadowed somebody. for a while. I've been curious, had a coffee, said this seems to be of interest, and I've asked him, would you mind if I shadowed, or whether I could come to a meeting to see how this particular part of the business works. And I think that's a really good way, certainly for those of you on the call that are working for large organizations. Many big organizations now have shadow programs to allow people to see what it's like to work in different areas. Even with the large companies, when you're early in your career now, you know, if you join a professional services company, their internships are not saying you have to go and do audit or you have to do tax.
Yeah.
They will tell you across all of them so that you get a good feeling for what the different roles are, so that you can make an informed decision around what you want to do. And it's no different when you're mid-career and you want to navigate from being a DevOps engineer to something else within the company. And I can give you a good example of that, Ibuk, and I did that in my career. When I started, I was a microelectronics engineer, but I realized that I was really interested in customers and the outcomes of what the technology did. And I was becoming less interested so much in designing new microprocessors. And what I did is I started to talk to the business leaders to say, you know, what will I need to do? What skills would I need to do? And then I would say, would you mind if I came out to a customer call to see what you talk about and how you articulate, you know, the technology that I'm designing? How does that end up providing benefit for customers? And
Yeah.
I think you've got to be naturally curious, ask the questions, and then, you know, be bold enough to say, well, if that's something you want to do, ask for some practical steps. Whether, you know, I often tell people, you know, you should always live your career through the 3 E's of experience, exposure, and education. And, you know, whenever you look to make a move or transition, make sure it's filling one of those buckets or all of
Yeah.
them. So am I going to get some good experience from this? It may be a shadowing opportunity. It gives me an idea of what that role is like. Is there an opportunity to get some exposure? Can I go out with somebody to see how the role is? Or can I be given a project in that particular team? I've been mentoring a young lady at the moment, and that's one of the things I've asked her to do, is to say, go and speak to the business to see if they have any projects in that area that you can apply the skills you have, but with a view to you getting a much bigger understanding of how that business is performing and whether it's of interest. Because also, when you do this, you can also qualify out, because you may find out, I don't like that. So
Yeah.
then you know that that's not something I want to do, rather than saying, I must go
Yeah.
there. And then education is always the case. You know, when you do your degree or whatever you do in terms of further education, that is never the end of the journey. I have been back to university. I've probably done more postgraduate courses over the years than I can remember, but they've all been intent based around, I need to learn a new area, or I need some new leadership skills that I recognize that maybe I don't have, and I've learned them from a senior leader who's mentored me. So then I've gone away and pursued you know, a way in which I can build those skills up. So that's probably the most important thing, those 3 E's of experience, exposure, and education.
Okay, I like that. I think that's a good way to sort of put, like, thinking about the North Star, right? So at every point, what do you want to get in terms of like experience, exposure, and education? I think that's great. You also mentioned something about like identifying when the industry is changing, or
Mm.
when potentially be innovated out of a job. Like, what are the markers that you've looked out for so far in your career to say, okay, I think it might be getting to the time where I need to pivot? And even now, like, what are the things that you keep an eye on to just say, okay, like, it's time to sort of move on to the next thing?
Yeah, and it varies by industry, Ibuka, and technology is probably one of the most disruptive industries, because technology doesn't just disrupt the technology industry, it disrupts pretty much every other industry. So, you know, and I probably use examples of friends who are lawyers. When I look at, say, law as an example, technology and digitization and AI and bots is disrupting the way the legal profession works. So you have to have an approach. Many people are, I would say, I have a fear of technology, or are not necessarily that interested in it. But I think you have to be aware of what technology can do to your industry. So for me, it's very important that you understand what's going on in your industry. If there is disruption through digitization, it doesn't mean that you suddenly have to overnight become a coder. But what it does mean is that you need to understand how you can embrace technology, and how it's going to make your job easier. Because many people, even with AI, which is a great example, people are saying, oh, it's going to take away our jobs, we're going to be, you know, nothing to do. I don't see it that way. I see it as being AI is going to enable people to do more creative and more valuable work
Yeah.
rather than the more iterative work that just is really either number crunching or reviewing documents, which we can do better. And if you look at things like Chat GPT, where you can generate reports which are good and give you the insight that you need, it allows people to go and do more meaningful research in other areas which would normally be taken up typing up a 5,000 word essay. So I think we've got to embrace the fact that technology can help in a lot of different areas.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, rather than be a naysayer, is thinking, wow, this is an opportunity. What do I
Yeah.
need to do?
Yeah.
How is this going to disrupt my industry? So it's important, whichever industry you're in, that you keep a good eye of what's going on. It doesn't have to be technology. It could be something else within your industry that's changing. But from a career perspective, it's always important to keep up to date with the trends within your business. And if it means that you need to upskill a little bit to make sure you can differentiate yourself, because ultimately, career journeys is around hopefully
Yeah.
aspiration. And if you want to then grow, then the way people grow is because they're learning more and they're differentiating themselves from their
Yeah.
peers to ensure that they get the opportunities when they come up.
Yeah. All right. I think there's something that you mentioned before around like throughout your career journey, like there are times where you're sort of down, right? So like you get a demotion, you get like a pay cut. How do you sort of like manage the risk of that? Because you never really know if the next thing is going to pan out well. Or how do you, I don't know, sort of like evaluate it so that the risk is not more long term than, okay, I'm going to take a pay cut now, but then I know that in the next few years I'm going to catch up to where I ideally want to be.
You always have to try and mitigate risk as best you can, but I'll always tell you that those people that take risk where they're not sure that will come out often come out okay. There are many people, if you talk to many successful business leaders, they took a huge risk, whether it was they gave up a really well paid job to start their own startup,
Yeah.
and then they've gone through years, or many leaders who have done well, who have done startups, have failed along the way, and that's part of the learning, right? You've got to be able to fail, and fail fast if possible, learn from it. I'm a big proponent of design thinking, which means that you iterate, you try again, you learn from the mistakes, or you learn from what didn't go well, you tweak it, and then you go again quickly. You don't kind of procrastinate and try and hypothesize over it for too long. You give something a try and see how you get on with it.
Yeah.
And careers is one of those things where there is some certainty. If you've done the research and this is an area that you'd like to go into, you can do some planning, but there's no guarantees. And if anyone looks at my profile, and I think I shared this, it doesn't share the fact that there's probably at least 2 or 3 demotions and a few lateral moves.
Yeah.
Some of those moves were planned, some of them were unplanned. But what I will say is that you learn along the way, and if it's not right, you can pivot. And I think what you have to be able to do is to be very clear around what you would like to be able to achieve and say, right, I want to learn more about AI. I'm currently working in this area. What do I need to do? And again, applying those 3 lenses of the 3 E's, you may say, well, okay, I can go into LinkedIn and do an AI course to start with to give me an awareness of the market.
Yeah.
Now I need to look at how I then make that move. There are risks. It doesn't mean that if you're a doctor today, you can be an AI data analyst tomorrow. It may or may not work out straight away. But what you have to have is that passion and that purpose about what you want to do. If you're not happy in the role that you're in, then only you can make that difference and change that. And you have to be intent based about it, and you have to plan it. It won't happen. There is a little bit of luck in this world, and we all have that from time to time. But long term, you need to plan, and you need to then put in place a number of different strategies to be able to execute against
All
that.
right. Yeah, I think I'm hearing you say like long term, thinking is the way to go. And there's something you said also, at the start about shadowing. I think that also like reduces the risk because you can shadow someone, realize you don't like it, and then try and find something else that may work for you as well.
Absolutely, you can always iterate, and I think when I spoke at the conference we met at, I said that there are different people that play a different role between a mentor, a coach, and a sponsor.
Yeah.
And I think I said the 2 of them that you can actually ask for are mentors and coaches. The one that's harder to get, you can't ask for a sponsor. A sponsor will observe you from afar, and then he decides to, or she decides to advocate you when you're not in the
Yeah.
room.
Yeah. Thank you. So I want to get into a bit of like the practicality about like a career plan, right? If I'm thinking now, I want to draw up my career plan. What are the first like few things you would say that I should do in order to get started?
Yeah, and it's one I get asked quite a lot by mentees, and I've always taken an approach which is similar to how you plan a project, and I think your career plan is like that. And the first thing I ask all of my mentors before we get into what I would say the practical parts is, what's your purpose in life and what's your passion? So you may not be doing that right now, but that may be what you want to do. From that, we set that as the vision. The vision is in 20 years' time, I want to be retired, or I want to be able to be doing this. I know right now I have to concentrate on my career, but my long-term goal is that I want to get here. So we set that as the vision. Then what we then do is we set about a number of different strategies to be able to get to that vision. These are the building blocks. And it could be, I'm going to do this particular role, or I'm going to do this education, or I'm going to be able to, I'm going to move countries, for instance. I'm talking to a mentee at the moment where he's thinking of actually moving countries. You know, he's decided that, you know, that's going to be best for him. So those are the sorts of things that you set as the strategy, say that's part of what you're going to do along the way. And then the next most important part of that, and bearing in mind this cycle I'm talking about with a mentee can take anywhere between 6 and 8 months. So it's not a quick fix. You go into it, you iterate parts, you tweak it. I stress test it with them and ask them questions and probe them to say, is that what you really want to do? And when it lands a number of times, then I know that they mean it. Once you've got the strategy in place, then it's about execution. What are you going to actually do? You know, what are the tangible things that you're going to do? And we document them down. And this starts to kind of form this picture, the vision, their North Star, where they want to get to, the strategies that they have to be able to do that. And we document them down.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? What are you going to execute to hit those things? It could be, I'm going to go and learn. I'm going to go back to school to do an MBA. I'm going to go and do a course over here. Or I'm going to get some shadowing here or some sponsorship. And then the most important part of it is the measurement. How do you know that you've done those things? So that's my job with the mentee, to go back and say, right, these are the things, how are you getting on? I hold them accountable to that. Now, once you have that, it can change. And all that happens is, as you had those check-ins, you turn around and say, okay, that strategy there, what's changed? Okay, the economy's changed or something's happened that's no longer there. Then you can pivot. So it's not cast in stone, but it's that ability to be able to say, that's the strategy we set out for. After 2 years of going down that strategy, that's not the route I want to go. You then reevaluate, you reiterate, and then you set a new one within that foundation block. But the overall goal, or the North Star, hasn't changed. It's just the way to get there changes. When you codify that and you actually write that down, that's what I hold my mentees accountable to. When we meet and we talk, that's what we present, and that's what we go through to see how they're doing against it.
Okay. All right. So it's, you have the, you know, big picture goal in the next 20 years that I want to do, and then your strategy sort of just like move up, you know, trying to get closer to that.
So vision, strategy, execution, measurement. And I always say to people, the vision, I say, that doesn't change probably for about 5 years. You only revise the revision, you know, that's how long it takes. The strategy part, 2 to 3 years, you can change them. You give it a while. And then the execution is more near term. That's over the next year.
Yeah.
I think if you think in that way for your career, and you actually write it down, people say, yeah, that's quite straightforward, but writing it down and being held accountable for it, that means that you've got a robust career action plan that you can work on and you can iterate when need be.
Yeah. All right. I like the part about saying like being accountable for it. So like, how do you sort of get that, you know, accountability in your career?
In my career, personally, I probably hold myself to quite a high standard in terms of my expectations of myself. And probably one of the things I've learned along the way is around self-awareness and not treating myself too hard. And that's probably important as a leader, because if you hold yourself to a very high account, you can often hold
Yeah.
your teams to a very high account, which may or may not be feasible or possible, and then they feel that they're not able to achieve. So for me, I think I've had a number of different ways I've done that. I think I get a very good balance between setting my goals. I don't change my goals very often. If you remember at the start of this call, we were talking about, what's my fifth career, and I think I shared it with you. Um, I'm going to be an executive coach in the next 2 or 3 years. I've qualified to do that, but the whole idea is, as I transition, as I get towards what I would say is the latter part of my career, I would like to do more coaching and more portfolio non-exec work. So I've been working on that for probably the last 5 or 6 years, because as I get towards where I want to go, I know that's my next career.
Yeah.
It might move out, it might be 8 years from now, but that's what I will do next, because I know I've spent the time to understand that's what I like doing, that's what I'm passionate about, that's where my purpose lies. And I know ultimately when I stop working in corporate life, that's what I would do,
Yeah.
to move forward. And I think your career has to be done in that way.
Yeah. All right. Amazing. I think this idea of like continuous learning, I think is very popular in tech because like the industry is like constantly changing. So you sort of know you have to evolve as the industry is changing, but it's not as much in other like, industries. How does one then, cultivate that habit of continuous learning, especially when you don't find yourself in a, fast-paced like career?
I think every industry is evolving or changing or being disrupted, Ibukan, and I would challenge anyone to tell me an industry that isn't,
Yeah.
because I can tell you now, if they say it isn't, I would turn around and say, well, digitization is disrupting your industry. That will have an impact, whether you're a dentist, whether you're a doctor or a lawyer. So I think all industries, whether it's technology, whether it's legislation, whether it's, I mean, everyone, this is probably quite pertinent where, everyone's at Davos this week. There'll be a number of things that will come out of Davos around sustainability, amongst other things around poverty, etc. So I think that it's important that whichever industry you're in, there will be an impact on that. And I think, to my point earlier, you've got to ensure that you're keeping up with where your industry is going, because that's the opportunity to grow your career. We're always going to need lawyers. We're always going to need, doctors. But even if you look at those professions, they are changing in terms of, if you take a doctor, the amount of technology that's being used and the I guess the skill set now needed, not only to diagnose and consult, but also to be able to use that advanced technology that makes their jobs easier,
Yeah.
means that you will have to upskill and learn. And I'll give you one practical example. I had double eye surgery last year, and I actually posted about it, because I'd waited probably nearly 30 years to do the operation. And the reason I did was because at the time when I was being treated at Moorfields here in London, they said, the technology is moving on. You can manage for now. We're going to leave it as late as possible. When I think about when I was going to Moorfields 30 years ago, the equipment they were using to the equipment they were now using now, when I had my operation last year, it's evolved so much.
Yeah.
It's the same people that qualified as eye surgeons that had to do it, but their skill sets had to evolve. And
Mm.
that's my point. Otherwise, the most advanced technology and the best treatment you can have is no longer able to do that. So that continuous learning in every profession is always going to happen. And whether it is technology or whether it's legislation that's changing the way we do things, I think that's something where you should always try and keep ahead of that. It doesn't take a lot. I always say that a little bit of reading on your industry. I try and do it. I hybrid work. I go to the office twice a week. I have a 40-minute commute to work and a 40-minute commute back. I will use it to read something.
Yeah.
Yeah, rather than read the local newspaper, I will read something either about my industry, or I will read a book from, either on leadership or from one of my friends who's published a book. So I will do something relevant that's going to upskill me or give me more knowledge or give me an ability to do my role better.
Yeah, that's great. And I think through like, the ups and downs of career planning, how do you manage like stay motivated, right? What keeps you going, or like what should people be looking at, especially like when you make a move that isn't necessarily immediately like you can see the results, right? You know that it's going to be long term. How do you sort of see through that long term suffering, or like
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily suffering. I mean, it can be frustrating at times, but I'm going to zoom out a bit. Your career is only one part of your life. It's not,
Mm,
and the one thing I will never be defined by is by my job or my career. It's one aspect of me as a person. So again, I have lots of other interests which balance out the fact that I
yeah,
have a career, whether it's art collecting, whether it's sport, whether it's, social enterprises or work, in philanthropy. There are other areas that balance out who I am as a person. So yeah, sometimes when maybe the career is going slower than I expect, then I ensure that I've got, from a mental health perspective and a well-being perspective, I'm balancing out with other things that kind of make my
yeah,
life full and make sure it's enriched in different areas. And it can be very humbling when things are not going well. When you maybe, I think a few years ago, I was having a tough time at work, and I was looking after a region. I was looking after Africa as a continent at the time, and I was having a bumpy ride. But then I went to Kenya, and I volunteered and taught in a school for disabled children for a couple of days. The fact that I didn't get that promotion was no longer that particularly that relevant, because I think it humbles you. So having things outside of your career journey and your job is important, because it shouldn't define you. And I think for me, how I've navigated when things are not going my way is I self-reflect, and I look at, are there any things I can do to change that outcome, or is it just things that are outside of my control? And life is like that. There are things in your control and things that are outside of your
yeah,
control. When I know it's outside of my control, I am more willing to accept that and just know that, look, I could do this 100 times differently. It's not going to change the outcome. So I don't waste time and energy on that. And I think that's an important part of, for many of your listeners on this call, is that your job is only one part of you. And certainly, as I always say, when we leave this world, and we all will leave it at some point, I don't want to be defined by the fact that I was a senior director at this company or whatever, and, I may have earned a load of money or whatever. What I would like to be defined by is what impact I had on others while I was here. And I think we should always keep that front and center of your career and what you do as well, because you can do both. People often say you can't, but you can. You can ensure you're living a purpose-led life through your career.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. I really like that answer, because I think a lot of times like people frame your career as probably like the one thing that defines you, or the most important thing that you would do. And I learned that lesson the hard way last year as well, where it's like I actually need, for my own sanity, I need to separate myself from, how my career is going, because there's always going to be like, ups
Yeah.
and downs, and you can't like dictate the pace of your life just based on,
No.
where your career is
And
personally.
it is hard booking, to be honest, because society defines that, our culture defines it at times. We often joke about it. Certainly, as we're both Nigerians, and we do, because you meet a Nigerian family, and within the first 2 or 3 questions they're going to ask you what you do, who's your family, and all the usual stuff.
Yeah.
So we know that. And that's something you have to kind of live with culturally. But I think it's important, certainly in this day and age. And I'm, my children are teenagers now, and I'm certainly not bringing them up in that respect. I'm supporting a lot of the things that they do, both academically, but more importantly, outside of academics as well. And if you ask my children, they'll tell you that, that I've said to them, there are 4 life skills that you need. If you take away academics as being given, the gifts I've given, or at least enable my children to do, is to speak another language,
Mm.
do some sport, both individually and team sport, and play a musical instrument. Because actually, if you look at the cognitive skills that you build up from a life skill perspective, having those 4 things, the other 3 outside of the academics, is the other 3 actually give you very good communication and life skills that you can use in any environment. And I think that's equally as important when you're building your career up, is to have other things that you are capable of doing.
All right, that's amazing. I'm going to adopt that. I think my next question would be on something like you've touched like throughout the call, which is you've talked about like mentorship, you've talked about coaching. I think first thing is, at what point do you consider, you know, I need a mentor, I need a coach, and maybe what should you also be looking out for in, you know, getting any of those people to help grow your career?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question, and you know, I'm sure most people know the definitions of coaches, sponsors, and mentors. And I always try and make it quite simple when you're thinking about whether you need one. If you remember the talk I did, you know, you have a different tool for different parts of the journey, and you have to know the skill and the strength is knowing which tool to use at the right time. And often with mentoring, as I always say, a mentor is there to tell you or to advise you on what to do. A coach is there to talk with you. They're not going to give you the answers, but they're going to coach you to the answer. And as always, the sponsor talks about you when you're not in the room, and provides that advocacy. When you're going about mentoring, I think because it's more of a case where you're looking for advice, then whichever career track that you're looking for, or whichever route, whether you're even changing careers, then you should try and seek people that are in those industries that you can relate to. Do your research. The one piece of advice I always give to people is that you should look for mentors ahead of when you need them. So, you know, the hardest thing is, and you can imagine, I probably get half a dozen requests to mentor every week. I can't do it because I'm scaled out. But I think if you build up rapport and you build up a relationship with someone over the time because you follow them, you understand what they're doing, then you've probably got a better chance. And in fact, one of the people I'm mentoring this year waited 6 months for a space to appear because I said, I'm not going to be able to do that now, maybe later. I may have a space. And they waited. They said, no, I'm prepared to wait because I've done their homework and said, you're the right person for me to be able to help me in what I'm doing. And I think, you know, I think it's advisable people follow people first, see what they're doing, you know, follow a number of people and then build up a relationship. If you see that person is either speaking or doing an event, you know, follow them, build up that relationship. So then when you would like to ask or need some mentoring, at least you've built that relationship up rather than it's just a request to say, please, can I get some mentoring, please? Because I think that's much harder. So again, as you would with your career, plan it, follow a number of people that you like, start to engage them. If you see them, try and meet them, and then build up that rapport. And then it becomes nicer when you do ask, because it doesn't feel like it's suddenly, in most cases with mentoring, it's because there's a problem and then you're trying to solve for it, which I think is a lot harder for people to be able to do.
Okay, all right. And I think one of the things you actually mentioned, you know, in that talk where I attended was you should pay for coaches. Why should anyone pay for a coach?
I think it's fairly straightforward, and I think I challenged people in the room is that, you know, you have to invest in yourself. And I think coaching is an investment in yourself. And what you should expect is that your employer should pay for all of your, you know, all of your investment in you, your personal development. They'll pay for some of it. And typically as employers will pay for, you know, learning and education for you that's going to benefit the company ultimately, which is understandable. But that personal development, that personal growth, which coaching can provide, is something that, if you're fortunate enough where you work in a company like I do at LinkedIn, where we have a coaching culture, then you may be fortunate enough to get coaching because we have people that do that internally. But where you don't have that, then you should consider coaching. And coaching should be for a period of time. It's not a long-term thing that you have to have for a long time. But when you're, and I think I gave the example at the talk, when you're either certainly mid-career and you're stuck in a particular area or you want to transition, a coach is a really good person to be able to talk through to make sure that you're making the right decisions, and then you get to the right outcome for you, or the right approach that you can take. And I think that, you know, you have to invest in that. And I think that people that feel they shouldn't invest in a coach, I think as a leader, and I've been coached several times during my leadership career, I think it's probably the most valuable piece of investment in myself that I can give. And, you know, I think I said in the room, there were a number of people in that room that were coaches, but it was surprising, wasn't it? I think there were maybe 100 people at the talk, and I think there was maybe only 2 or 3 that had self-invested in themselves in terms of coaching. And I think that's telling, because a lot of people were stuck or they were wondering what to do next. And I think coaching is a wonderful way to be able to do that.
I completely agree, because I went through coaching at one of my previous companies, and honestly, it's one of the best experiences I've had in terms of just being able to get clarity. And it's not necessarily because they tell you what to do, it's just that they know how to guide you to the answer. And because from you, it feels more true than someone just telling you what to do.
It is. And there's a question, I'm going to answer it here, because someone's asking, there's so many people that are actually, out there saying that they're providing this service, and how do you separate the wheat from the chaff? Yeah, it's one of the ones where, I mean, most coaches come by recommendation, but the most important thing about the coach is that any person that you're going to work with, you will always have what they call a chemistry call, which is a bit of time with them first to see whether it's a good fit. And that kind of, you'll get a little bit of a feeling whether that's the right sort of person for you. But ultimately, you're going to look at people that are qualified, and then that helps to some extent. Most people belong to a coaching federation or have some level of accreditation, so at least the basics of coaching can be covered. But then, it's what works for you. There are many coaches out there that are not qualified who are fantastic coaches. So it's worth investing. It doesn't mean that the first person you meet is going to be your coach. Could be a recommendation. You may go to them, have that chemistry call, and it doesn't work. And me as a coach, there are people that I've had a chemistry call with, and I've been honest to say, I don't think I'm the right person for you, and I'm comfortable. I don't want to take somebody's money just because I can coach them. If it doesn't feel right and I don't think I can add value, I'm quite happy to say, look, maybe not me, maybe somebody else, try somebody else. So I think, that's one of the journeys around it. Hopefully you don't have to see too many, but I would say to anyone that's seeking a coach, maybe look at 2 or 3, and then, get a feeling and see which one you feel comfortable with. Have a few coaching sessions, and if it feels great, continue. If it doesn't, then I'm sure you and the coach will have that conversation as to whether it's having the desired effect.
Yeah. Someone said, where do we find good tech coaches?
Good tech coaches. Well, coach is a coach, depending. It shouldn't really matter what the industry is. But there's lots of different. If you look at the coaching federations, there's about 2 or 3 different accreditations. You can start there if you want. If you want to be really cheeky, you could just put in LinkedIn search and search how many coaches come up. Yes, there will be a lot that will come up. And then maybe look at ones that look interesting, follow them first, see what they do, look at their recommendations, because every good coach will have a number of recommendations of people that have done that, and go from there. But in terms of just a specific tech coach, no, coaches work across all industries, and some may pivot or they may anchor more towards tech, but all coaches will work across most industries.
Yeah. Someone also put in a question about, what advice would you give someone who is scared to change careers because of the age factor?
That's a great question. I would say dare to dream. Just do it. Don't be scared. I think ageism is something that most of us are afraid of, for one, and it's understandable as to why. But, I would just say that whatever age the person is, just think about it. Do you want to live the rest of your life not happy in what you do? And what's there to lose? What's the worst case? You change, you try something, it doesn't work out, and maybe you find something else along the way, or, as a stopgap, you can go back to what you're doing if you want to. But, as they always say, it's better to have tried than not to have tried at all, really.
Yeah.
And I do understand it. When you get older, you've got more responsibilities. You may have, commitments, children, mortgages, all the other stuff. So it's harder just to walk away unless you've got somebody that can support that, and you've got to plan it, again, as I've always said. So it's not easy, but what I would say is to try, or at least look at maybe adjacent moves, not such a huge career change, but one that is adjacent to what you're doing, so you can still use a lot of your skills, but then you're moving gradually away from that. So a plan around that can also be one, with a number of lateral moves that could be equally as beneficial to get to the end game.
I think that makes sense. I guess even as one of the things you said is like if you've done your research ahead, so if you know it's going to take you a few years, building up your emergency fund can even give you some, some confidence to say, okay, if all else fails, I have some money set
Well,
aside.
I mean, I could do a whole session on that. That all around financial literacy and how you do that. We'll probably talk about that another time. But
Okay.
as I always say to my mentees, you build. I call it the 3-1-5, which is always have 3 months living costs in your account in case you get made redundant or whatever. You build very short term, 1 year's worth of salary in your account in short term investments, and then ultimately you provide towards 5 years of income
Oh,
in equity. It could be in property, it could be in different things, but you have to build that 3-1-5 plan. That's the most important thing.
all right, thank you. There was one other question that says, what career do you advise someone that wants to switch to the tech industry at fresh? So I guess it's like, how do you pick what
Yeah,
aspects of?
that's a great question. And I'm going to refer to the fact that because I think I shared the top jobs from our report from LinkedIn, actually from our research. So if I look at I guess the roles that are in demand, the top trending ones would be certainly data analytics, data scientists. I think you'll find that machine learning still is up there. Actually, on the softer side, social media digital marketing, they are trending really well at the moment. And sales business development in tech
Mm.
is another area which is doing particularly well. So depending on what they want to do, whether it's more, on the technical side, which is where the sort of machine learning and, AI and all the other things are, or whether it's more on the marketing side, they are all still top trending jobs at the moment. And I can't say any more because we're just about next week to issue our 2024 data, which is still under embargo. I was doing some press work this morning, but it won't be a surprise that, growth will figure highly in terms of careers in tech, which are around growth, will continue to be ones that are focused on.
All right. If you have any last minute questions, I think we have a few more minutes to go. So if
Mm.
you just put in the chat. But while we're waiting for that, I wanted to ask, like, so career planning for someone who is like in the first to maybe like fifth year of their career looks different from someone who is in like the fifth year onwards. Like at every sort of like entry level, mid level, senior level, what are the key things you should be thinking about in terms of career planning?
I think in the first sort of, as I call it, early in career, then it should be, the word I always say is curiosity. Just be curious. Whatever company you're in, just look at how the company works and be open to the fact that wherever you came in, I'm going to give an example. If you came into a company on a internship that was in, I don't know, technology, then if that's what you've come in on, then understand what else the company does,
Yeah.
and again, be willing to think that, well, I now know because I've listened enough that I know that my career will change a few times in my career. So if that's the case, then what else is out there? How does this company work? And what can I learn from that? Because what you may find is actually there are things that you're quite interested in. Wow, that's really marketing. I never thought of that, but that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
And again, I'll give a practical example, and it's one that makes me laugh. I don't think my youngest brother is probably not on the call, but my youngest brother qualified as a pharmacologist and thought that was it. He was going to go into pharmacy. But when he finished, he realised when he started work, that's not what he wanted to do. And actually, he was much more interested in business,
Yeah.
and he wanted to get more into the commercial side. So he went back to school on the education part. He went and did a chartered marketing institute diploma for a year, and then he moved out of proper, I'd say, pharmacology into sales and marketing, and he's done that pretty much for the last sort of 15, 20 years, and he's enjoyed that. And I think he made that decision fairly early in his career where he looked around and thought, actually, I prefer that. What do I need to do about it? He actually reached out to me, said, like, bruv, you're in sales and that, what do I need to do? And, gave him some advice, and he did that, and he made the pivot. So I think those first 5 years, be open, be curious, explore as much as you can. Once you get to sort of your late 20s, early 30s, that's when people start to then, you're sort of getting into those early parts of your management career if you're moving up, or you're looking at your career a little bit more seriously because you might be getting your first property. Then it's a bit more, life gets a bit more serious. You may be having children or starting a family. So then you have to kind of really decide what you want to do. I think during that time, I always look at that as being a case of you do put a more robust career plan in place to what we've talked about on this call over the last hour or so, and then be very intent based about what you want to do. Still have that curiosity, but know that you're going to have to make some decisions, and then you're going to have to then decide whether you're going to go back to school and do an MBA, or I'm going to go and do some postgrad over here, or I'm going to pivot over time from what I'm doing today over there, and what does that look like? And then using the variety of different tools we've spoken about to be able to do that. So I think that's quite important. I would say people between the ages of around, I always say the critical part of your career is that time between when you're about late 20s, probably early 30s through to your 40s. That kind of defines where you're going to end up, because during that journey, you're going to become a leader in most cases. You're probably going to lead larger teams in bigger organizations at some point. If you're in a professional services organization like one of the big four, then you really, by the time you get to the end of your 30s, if your career is to get to partner, you need to have made partner. It's probably similar in law firms. Otherwise, it starts to get a lot more trickier as you get older to do that, and it's probably unlikely to happen. So I think you have to make a lot of decisions and a lot of planning during that period to say, right, what is it I really want? How does that balance out with my life generally in terms of family and other commitments I may have, or other passions, and where do I get that balance from? And I think that, one of the ways you can do that is to sit down again and plan that out, knowing that it could change, but equally having a plan in the first place. I mean, you can't see mine. If I swivel my camera around, I always keep a little note up in terms of what my goals are. I don't set many of them now, but when I do, I put them up just as a reminder, because it keeps me focused. And I think, when you have a mentor that's kind of keeping you accountable to your career plan, I think that's important, especially during that sort of mid part of your career. Most of the people I talk to and I mentor are, I mentor a lot of young people that are early in career, but it's the mid-career people that I see the most who are stuck or having challenges where they really do need help. Is because, to make that leap is, it's a lot more serious, or they're not sure what to do, and they end up getting stuck and they stay where they are, unhappy, but earning money, but not fulfilling, what they really want to be able to do.
Yeah. I like that. We have one last question that we'll take. And I think you've answered this, but just in case you have any insights specifically that you'd like to share. It says, what advice would you give someone pivoting into a new career where it seems I had to start afresh?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the advice I would give is that if you've made that decision, then you've made the hardest part of the decision, which is you're going to pivot that. So it will be a lateral move. It will often be a move that's maybe not the same grade. You might be going from senior manager back to associate because you're learning an entire new industry. But remember, you're on that journey because you're going to be successful in that, and you want to be able to move into something that's going to give you ultimately a lot more satisfaction and happiness in your role. So I would say that the advice will be is that if you've made that move, then you've done the hard part. What you then need to do is to stick with it, because the hardest thing to then do is to then turn around and say, oh, maybe I've made a mistake, or I'm scared, and you go back and revert to type. If you've made the decision to do that, then stick it out, see it to the end, and you'll eventually get back. And I've done that several times. As I said, on my LinkedIn profile, it probably doesn't easily show that I've had quite a few demotions and a couple of sideways moves. All the sideways moves I've made were intentional. They were ones where I wanted to move in. And probably one practical example I gave was that I remember I was on the business side, and I wanted to learn more about consumer. And the only way to do that, a role came up, and it was probably a grade or two below, was slightly less money actually. But what I knew it was going to do was going to give me a broader skill set across both business to business and consumer. And what I knew that would do for me eventually in 4 or 5 years' time, it was going to give me the opportunity to lead at a more general manager level, where I had a much more holistic view of the business rather than being siloed and being an expert in one area, which you can do. You can have a very successful career, but I wanted a much broader career, because if you really want to get to be a CEO of a company, you have to have a broader understanding of the business. So for me, that was the right move. It meant I'm going to take a step back, but I know I'm going to take 2 steps forward further down the line, and it's going to serve me well.
All right. I think I've learned so much, but I think one thing that has come up, over and over again is just that long-term, planning. Have your North Star and always remind yourself of what you're trying to do. We're at time. So I won't keep everyone, further. Thank you so much, Cindy, for spending this evening with us.
It's been a pleasure, Bookham. Thanks for having me as well.
So thank you so much, everyone. Make sure that you're following us. We have these workshops, as I said, on a quarterly basis, but every day we share content on developing your career and making sure that, you're doing that also in an intentional and in a wholesome way as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a good evening and see you on Instagram. Bye.
Take care. Thank you.